So, as you progress through the journey of self-education, as you progress through this jungle of reading interesting books, educating yourself, having fun in the process, you're going to come across certain quotes that tend to stick with you. Certain quotes that are so good that we might as well misattribute them to some grand literary figure. So in this case, the quote is pretty well known. Quote, "I cannot remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten. Even so, they have made me," unquote. One of these quotes hits upon such an essential fact of education and human nature that it doesn't really matter where the quote is from, but yet we have this silly habit of attributing these big, grand-sounding quotes to grand-looking people. So, in fact, this quote was partly misattributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And if you do a little bit of digging, Emerson actually didn't write this. He didn't really write this quote down directly, or he didn't write it down verbatim in any one of his volumes. It just kind of corresponded with his body of work. But the first evidence of this quote was actually found in a Harvard University magazine in 1896. And it was actually a part of this obituary about this guy by the name of William Henry Furness. So William Henry Furness recounted this conversation with a certain Emerson, who actually said the quote, "I cannot remember the books I've read more than the meals I've eaten." But it could be the case that it was another Emerson by the name of G.B. Emerson. So there were a lot of Emersons floating around. And so William Henry Furness recounted his account where a certain Emerson said to him, or passed this quote to him. And then I think from then on, this is kind of like it was misattributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson, because who's the first Emerson that we think of when we say Emerson? Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American Transcendentalist writer. But anyway, that was a weird digression in history, so expect more of these weird rabbit holes. That's kind of like what I do for a living in the academy, which is we find these really weird corners to look down, to look down into, and we really want to spend every penny we have to dig out all the conclusions. But anyway, that was an example of what not to do when you're trying to embody the qualities of what Emerson's talking about here. That was an example of, remembering too much of what I've read, or remembering too much of these minute details that we missed the bigger picture. So in this video, I want to sort of provoke some thoughts within all of you guys. I want to open up a discussion for you guys to also to contribute in the comment section down below. What does it mean to be well read enough so that you don't have to remember any of the books you've read, but you actually you've internalized them so much that it turns into a way of living, or a way of perceiving life, and a way of thinking? So I've noticed that within myself, I've inherited this really bad habit as I've entered university and exited university, as I've completed my bachelor's and my honors degree, and as I've sort of went through the whole high school gauntlet of memorizing information, regurgitating all the information back on the test paper. We've developed this really bad habit of viewing information acquisition, or viewing the act of memorizing, as a sign of intelligence. So there's a really stereotypical image of some literature student walking around with their fucking Lord Chesterfield under their arms, and they're like quoting big lines from books. This is such a stereotypical image that you might see a lot of first-year literature students do it, but as you ascend up the ranks, as you get better at close reading, as you get better at analyzing texts, and as you get better at parsing through complex arguments, you're actually going to find that you'll find yourself quoting a lot less people. Because what's happening in the process is that your own thinking will emerge. As you stand on the shoulders of giants, as you read fine works of the past, you start to develop a very unique perspective combined with your own life experience that's going to be so new that, these giants in the past, they can do nothing more than to support your argument. And that's sort of the sweetness of developing your own ideas. And that's sort of the first step of developing that elusive quality of being well-read, which is to recognize that you're not in the business of memorization. You can commit poetry to memory. There's no problem with that. In fact, committing poetry to memory is a really good pastime, like doing a crossword puzzle. But if you view the entire project of reading, if you like, every time you read a book, if you obsessively want to memorize every little fact, then I think you've got this whole thing ass backwards. Reading is about developing a way of looking at the world. And in fact, you'll experience this definitely when you encounter well-read people. It's not about they're going to throw some obscure title at you. It's not about they can quote the most elaborate passage in Hamlet. It's none of that stuff. But they have a certain wisdom. They have a certain intelligence about them. They can approach problems from these very novel and unexpected ways that leaves you intrigued, wanting to hear more. And they have a certain way of articulating themselves that is so compelling that whatever story they end up telling, you end up staying for that story. Whereas certain people, when they tell a story, the first thing you think about is like, how do I make an excuse to get out of here? So that's the difference. It's about developing a way of thinking that is quite compelling, and it is also about being able to articulate that thinking using language and using storytelling. So those are kind of the two grand pillars that I think will over time get developed. No matter what you read, no matter the kind of genre you're reading. I mean, like if it's good information, if it's deliberately mind expanding, if it's sufficiently difficult, and if it's rooted in literature, if it's rooted in like some high quality history book, if it's rooted in high quality nonfiction, over time, as you sift through these dense webs of information, these two skills will simultaneously developed, because it's both going to work on your language skills and work on the kind of the way of thinking. And that's what I think. Those are the two components that I think really makes up that really elusive, well-read quality. And I think over time, you'll transcend this need to memorize things, because in the age of AI and internet, you can look up any quote you want. You can find precisely where the quote is. You can kind of find whatever information you want. But the true quality of being well-read is really about how this information or how this piece of information turns into knowledge, and in turn morphs into a way of looking at the world and a way of thinking, to give you a compelling idea to talk about, and to also give you the language to articulate that idea. And that's what I think really is the kind of invisible force that shapes us as we read more. It's not about accumulating, a stack of clever ideas, but it's about how do you put that idea into compelling language? How do you speak in a common tongue of the everyman? How do you inspire people with these ideas? And how do you think enough about an idea that it becomes inspiring enough for you to share? So those are the things that I think are the two most important things when it comes down to being well-read. And before we go here, and there's another example, which is, have you ever noticed? So I recently met one of my friends who's actually practicing as a doctor. And sometimes I'm very fascinated by these types of people, which is like, what do you think about when you look at a piece of bone, which to me, it's like, this bone just looks like the thing that my girlfriend's dog is chewing on, right? But the minute she perceives that bone, just by feeling it, just by judging the texture of it, immediately she would have a label for it. Immediately she won't know like which bone, which part of the body this bone belongs to. That's kind of like what medical students do. They commit years to memorizing details until it becomes a kind of instinct. And then vice versa. Another friend of mine asked me recently, what do you think about when you're parsing literature? What do you think about when you look at a block of text? And what do you think about when you read a very long kind of treatise on a certain philosophical topic? And I sort of had the same reaction as a medical student or that doctor friend of mine, which is, we perceive text, which looks just like text to untrained eyes, but we're able to find tone. We're able to find arguments. We're able to find ways of articulating this tone. We're able to impose theory on this piece of text. We're able to situate the text in its historical context. We're able to read into the historical currents at the time, the politics at the time. So for us, it is really kind of like doing anthropological work, or it is really like taking a scalpel and dissecting the text into, and for us to draw interesting conclusions from. So that act of making those finer distinctions, so if a doctor is making finer distinctions about how to heal the human body, the humanities scholars, we are making a finer distinctions on how to fix the human soul. So it's a process where if a piece of literature is really compelling, If a novel is really mesmerizing to read, we want to know what made it so mesmerizing. And for us, making that finer distinctions is all about teasing out the things that make us truly human. It's about teasing those things out, and then we will broadcast it using whatever method possible, through a journal article, through a video like this, or through, something that we write on the internet. So that's really the kind of the healing process that goes on as you engage with the humanities. Over time, you'll develop this gaze where you're able to look at a block of text which used to look like just a normal block of text, but all of a sudden you'll find traces of humanity in it. You'll find traces of what makes us so selfish, but at the same time so selfless at the same time. You'll find beautiful contradictions in how human beings act, and you'll find these beautiful descriptions of inspiration, descriptions of sadness, descriptions of melancholy, and descriptions of just subtly human emotions that you wouldn't normally pinpoint in yourself. But that finer distinction is going to give you this brand new way of looking at the world. Because if you train yourself on a page, you can read into humanity in the same way when you turn your attention to the outside world. And that's what's going to give you two of those pillars. One, being able to develop really compelling ideas that you no longer rely on quotations from other people. And two, having the language enough to articulate what being human is all about. Because it's still a grand mystery to a lot of people. It's still a grand mystery even to me. And I feel like my journey has just the beginning of my journey, and I'm gonna spend more years exploring this this deep well of what it means to be a human being. And I think that's how I read the quote, "I cannot remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten. Even so, they have made me," because it's an invisible force that you will glean from being able to make finer distinctions. Not necessarily about memorizing quotes and dates, but being able to develop that process of thinking is what will make you into a well-read person. Robin Waldun here. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye.